Some of the biggest LGBT activists in America just got exposed as total frauds and total grifters. I'm Brad Polumbo, and we're going to break it down in this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet and across our politics from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around. And if you're a returning viewer, you know what I'm going to say. Do remember to hit that like button and do comment with your thoughts. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Anyway, guys, we have to talk about our first story, which is honestly shocking, but in another sense, it really shouldn't be. If you've been following my content for some time, you've probably heard me talk about GLAAD, one of the biggest LGBT activist organizations in America. It is a really radical group that very aggressively campaigns for the medical transitioning of gender-confused minors, including by intimidating and harassing media outlets that dare air dissenting opinions. It also maintains this really Orwellian list of journalists and public figures who have the bad or wrong views on these issues and kind of tracks them in a really creepy manner. I've discussed it before, but GLAAD activists have also basically tried to define homosexuality out of existence, referring to it as an offensive and outdated term, and trying to make sexuality about gender identity instead of biological sex and attraction to immutable biological traits. Now, all of this is unfortunately pretty far from where GLAAD began. It began as a really noble organization helping victims of the AIDS epidemic who were victims of some really brutal, nasty, and vicious homophobia and indifference during that epidemic. It also expanded and went on to do great work fighting for things like gay marriage. But the GLAAD of 2024 is so alarmist and so hypocritical and so partisan and so extreme that it doesn't bear a whole lot of resemblance to GLAAD of decades ago. I've spent a lot of time thinking, writing, and talking about the question of why this is happening at so many LGBT activist groups, not just GLAAD, but it's one of the biggest examples. And we may now have an answer, if a new expose from the New York Times is anything to go by. It's the money, stupid. This really remarkable reporting from a Times journalist named Emily Steele just took the lid off of GLAAD's finances and revealed that it's turned its $30 million budget into something of a slush fund for a lavish lifestyle and really amazing compensation for well-paid woke executives. For example, here's how the journalist recounts the CEO of GLAAD, Sarah Kate Ellis, her 2023 journey to visit the World Economic Forum's conference in Davos. A light rain fell at the Zurich airport one Sunday morning in January 2023 as Sarah Kate Ellis made her way from a seat in Delta's most exclusive cabin to a waiting Mercedes. It was there to chauffeur her to the Swiss Alps, where she and her colleagues would stay at the Tivoli Lodge, a 7-bedroom chalet that cost nearly $500,000 to rent for the week. You know, totally normal stuff for a non-profit. When Miss Ellis traveled for work, there were first-class flights, stays at the Waldorf Astoria and other luxury hotels and expensive car services, not to mention a Cape Cod summer rental and nearly $20,000 to remodel her home office, which was outfitted with a chandelier, among other accoutrements. More very normal, very fiscally responsible stuff for a non-profit. The grift is so blatant. Like, it's not even subtle. The overall pattern of spending represents a potentially abusive use of charitable funds that would be surprising and insulting to a lot of their donors, said Michael West, a lawyer who advises charities at the New York Council of Nonprofits. It appears she may have fallen into the trap of excess. You don't say, Michael. One of the things that makes this wild, lavish lifestyle of GLAAD executives even more glaring is the way they nickel and dimed their low-level employees. Some GLAAD employees were upset when they encountered executives' globe-trotting Instagram photos, and as word spread that Miss Ellis often flew first class, especially since employees said they face scrutiny over minor violations of the group's expense policy. One employee who expensed a cup of coffee was chastised for taking money away from the LGBTQ cause and had to reimburse GLAAD, according to a former employee. That is absolutely wild. They were going after low-level staffers for expensing a coffee, saying, "How dare you take away money from our noble cause and advocacy," while doing first-class flights and spending $500,000 on bougie trips for their executives. You actually can't make this shit up. Sarah Kate Ellis was openly flouting the rules that GLAAD had in place for its expenses. Many of Miss Ellis's expenses also appeared to break GLAAD's own rules for travel and entertainment, which at the time stated that all employees must fly economy, prioritize public transportation, and try to keep costs to a minimum. Yet Sarah Kate Ellis sought reimbursement for more than 30 first-class flights over an 18-month time period, according to the Times, even though their policy is that you always have to fly coach, because it's a nonprofit. Again. I mean, she apparently thinks she's like too good to take an Uber. Car services over 2 days in Washington cost GLAAD $3,900, including $1,000 for an SUV to pick her up at the airport, stop at the White House, and then drop her off at her hotel. A total of about 7 miles. Like, seriously, she could have taken an Uber for like maybe $100 for those different stops, max. The bills for car services for Miss Ellis and her colleagues on the Davos trip topped $15,000. Then there were repeated first-class flights to and from Los Angeles at thousands of dollars each. GLAAD spent more than $60,000 on airfare and hotel accommodations for Miss Ellis and Miss Gordon when they attended last year's Cannes Lions Advertising Industry Festival on the French Riviera. Well, to be fair to her, I mean, she had to go to the French Riviera. I mean, obviously, this is just an important part of her nonprofit work. In all seriousness, the gall of this grift is just jaw-dropping. Some of the most prominent LGBT activists in this country, who supposedly have dedicated their careers to work at nonprofits to fight for equity and justice and LGBTQ rights, are breaking their own organization's rules and possibly the law to cash out on first-class flights, lavish trips, and even home renovations. Now, as the journalist Benjamin Ryan reports, GLAAD is responding to this scandal not by taking accountability, but by removing the names of its board members from its website, potentially to stop people from contacting them and complaining or demanding refunds. I don't know, but they're trying to evade and make it unclear who to hold accountable for this, is what it seems like. Now, there's still more to this story beyond just the grift, beyond just the fact that donors need to stop cutting checks to GLAAD, and that the IRS needs to potentially investigate whether they should keep their tax-exempt status at all. This story also offers insight into a phenomenon I've discussed before. Why do these activist organizations end up so radical and so extreme? Simply put, that's the path to the money. Before Ellis took over in 2014, the Times reports that GLAAD's finances were in shambles. Its assets had dwindled as expenses far outpaced donations, which had declined steeply. That might be in part because so much progress had been made in the AIDS epidemic, which it was originally founded to address, and so much progress had been made in mainstreaming gay acceptance and gay rights. But Sarah Kate Ellis took over and wanted to make it into this huge budget, wealthy organization. And so she brought GLAAD into ever-expanding and ever more radical transgender activism territory, creating a new cause to champion and to fearmonger over, and most importantly, to fundraise on. And by making it more of a partisan institution that was constantly just attacking Republicans and shilling for Democrats, she even further ingratiated herself with major Democratic donors and got them tons of earned media on places like MSNBC, who were super eager to weaponize a noble-sounding nonprofit to use as a cudgel to attack Republicans. Now, all of this, of course, came at the expense of GLAAD's credibility and integrity. But that's evidently worth the trade-off for a lot of modern LGBT activists, if it'll get them booked for some first-class flights. You guys let me know what you think of this wild story. I'll link to the full breakdown from the Times in the description, so you can check it out in full if you'd like, but I think it's pretty crazy. I'm not shocked by it, to be honest, and sadly not. I have seen stuff like this in the past at these activist organizations, but I still am bothered by it, and I really do think they need to just full scale change things in LGBT Inc., in the activist part of the alphabet community, because they've gone hopelessly astray, and the resources of probably a lot of well-intentioned donors are being totally totally misused. All right, now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slug slugs.
If you're new here, do consider subscribing and sticking around, and don't forget to hit that like button. Today, we're going to listen to a kind of wild rant that one TikToker has for white men who dare to say they're non-political. This is a long one, so I am going to break it up into two parts. Let's take a listen to the first half.
Last night, I saw so many men on Hinge who said not political in their little bio, and also said like want children and not political. If you're a white man, it's always a white man. If you're a white man and your dating app profile says not political, check your privilege. Like, what is wrong with you? When you live in today's world, in this
privilege.
hour,
oh my God.
You are really going to say you don't care if Trump is president? You don't care if we have two more far-right, extreme psycho judges on the Supreme Court? You don't care if the man who might be the vice president wants a national abortion ban? You don't care that your mother, your sister, your possible daughters, if you want children, if you have children, that they have already many women in this country have already really lost a lot of reproductive rights. We might lose more. And they want us to lose our voting rights too. And I don't want to hear any, that's not going to happen. No one thought Roe versus Wade was going to be overturned. No one thought Chevron was going to be overturned. No one thought that the Supreme Court was going to say, presidents can do whatever the fuck they want. Does that not bother you? But it probably doesn't, because honestly, white men in America only care about white men in America. Not always. I say that the sweeping statement, but it is a sweeping statement, but I understand it doesn't apply to everyone. But white men in America, what about your BIPOC friends, your Black friends, your Hispanic friends? What about the people in your life that are women, are LGBTQIA plus identifying, disabled? What about literally anybody that's not an able, cis, straight white man? You are literally saying with that on your dating profile, I don't give a fuck about anybody other than myself.
Yes, girl. Unlike you, some people aren't obsessed with politics in an unhinged manner because politics is largely out of any individual's control. So spending all your time thinking and talking about it is often pretty unproductive. And no, that doesn't mean somebody only cares about themselves. For all you know, this guy with not political in his dating bio literally volunteers in his community at a freaking soup kitchen, or Big Brother, Big Sister, or is literally an incredibly selfless person. It doesn't mean you don't care about other people just because you don't want to hyperventilate about politics on TikTok in a truly fact-free and just deranged manner. I mean, they're going to take away our voting rights. Girl, get a grip. You have no idea what you're talking about. First, there is no mainstream movement to repeal the 19th Amendment whatsoever in Republican politics or in America. Women are not going to lose the right to vote. Even if some people did want that would literally, which they don't, except for a few crazies on Twitter, that would literally require a constitutional amendment, which would never happen and is incredibly hard to pass. You just have no idea what you're talking about, and it's just wild. The ignorance here is astounding. The Supreme Court did not say presidents can do whatever they want. In fact, it said something very different. It said there are criminally responsible for all private acts. They can be criminally responsible for some acts at the periphery of their powers, and then core presidential powers they have immunity for. It's a complicated legal argument. It's not as simple as, they said the president can do whatever they want. There's also always impeachment. The president can be impeached for anything, and that hasn't changed. You have no idea what you're talking about, babe. And her assumption that all BIPOC, again, a made-up fake word that means nothing coherent, LGBTQIA, disabled, women, Hispanic, all this are all just hardcore progressives who are all voting blue. That's not true. Literally millions of people who meet those categories are going to vote for Trump this November, just factually speaking. Do they all only care about white men too? Make it make sense. Your logic isn't logicking whatsoever. I mean, this is just toddler level political analysis. But unfortunately, there is more.
Men that say this really think they're doing something. They really think that they're being crunchy, or really kind of just edgy, I'm not political, they don't realize that what they're actually saying is I only care about myself, which also speaks to their lack of empathy, compassion, intelligence. If you aren't aware that not being political doesn't make you cool and crunchy, but it makes you an asshole, then that's what it's the easiest swipe left. I don't care how tall you are, how hot you are, what your job is. If that is on your profile, Immediate no. And if you are all crunchy and think that it's like hipster or something or cool to say you're not political, but you like to go camping, reconsider, because that nature might not exist, because the far right psychos that want to take over and have an authoritarian regime in the United States, they would basically get rid of anything that protects the environment, the planet, because they don't give a fuck. They only care about. But maybe you don't care, because if they do win, like, the whole world is going to cease to exist anyway, because we're going to basically roll back any environmental policies that have protected and like helped work us toward not doom.
I mean, girl, it sounds to me like these dudes dodged a bullet. Have you considered the possibility that maybe they put non-political in their bio so people like you specifically don't match with them? Anyway, it's just kind of crazy to go on a rant about how other people are unintelligent as part of a screed where you say like 5 different things over the span of like 90 seconds that are just factually untrue and have no basis in reality. She just dropped another one. I mean, she literally said that if Republicans are in charge, camping won't be a thing because the entire environment will be destroyed. Girl, touch grass. You do know Trump was president already, right? And whatever you think of his presidency and his policies, I liked some of them. I didn't like other ones. I thought he said a lot of stuff I didn't like and did a lot of stuff I didn't like. Other stuff he liked. He didn't destroy the environment. Camping is still a thing. Like, you're just unhinged. In the same way, this idea that the changing of a few climate policies one way or the other between a Democratic and a Republican administration will somehow save or cause the world to end and cease to exist, total apocalypse, has no basis in science. Coming from the follow the science crowd, the effect on global climate change would be minimal. Maybe it'd be something. Maybe you could argue. But even then, I mean, carbon emissions went down at one point under Trump because of expanded natural gas and fracking and those kinds of things replacing coal. So it's a lot more complicated. Also, it's a global issue, mostly being affected by China and India, to be honest. So it is not as simple as, if we don't have blue climate policies, the world will end. And if we do, everything will be fine. I mean, this is, again, toddler level political analysis. I would just humbly suggest, once again, to all the TikTokers out there thinking of doing their big one and popping off about politics today, maybe take a beat and think about, do I actually have any idea what I'm talking about? And if the answer to that question is no, maybe keep it in your drafts. But you guys let me know what you thought of this wild TikTok video in the comments below, and do hit that like button and let me know what you think. Now, before we wrap up today's show, I'll read a few of your comments from the last episode. One person says, "Ugh, Brad, I'm all for being centrist, but pretending Trump doesn't know Kamala is black is absurd. He's clearly referencing how she portrayed herself as Indian until it no longer benefited her. Don't be obtuse, bro." So I'm getting this a lot, where people have decided to defend what they wish Trump said instead of what he actually said, if you look at the words. But even on those terms, this isn't true. Kamala has been open about her black and her Indian heritage her entire political career. It's true, there are specific interviews or moments where she emphasized the Indian side, but you can go all the way back to 2003 and see her speaking about being the first black San Francisco district attorney. You guys, disagree with me if you want on this, but I really do think some of you guys are giving Trump way too much benefit of the doubt. Another person says, "Brad Polumbo is my favorite Brad. Brads are normally assholes, in my experience." Yeah, it's funny. I feel like Brad is like a typically frat bro name, and that just could not be less me or my personality or my vibe, really. But I don't ever put a lot of stock in those kinds of generalizations anyway. Another person says, "Dear Brad, you are not alone. Where has all the common sense gone? Why is the average intelligence level of the world easily half of what it was just 10 years ago?" You know, I have to wonder about that last part. Are people getting dumber, or is our dumbness and our ignorance just more fully on display due to social media and the rise of everyone having cameras and recording everything? It's an interesting thing to think about, and I'm not sure I know the answer. All right, everybody, that is it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Please do remember to hit that like button before you go. Comment with your thoughts. I do read the comments, and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. And make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. I'm really trying to hit 150,000 subscribers, and that would be great if you could help me get to that goal. And with that, we'll talk again next week.